Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Brush Sauce Theater. I'm Tyler Edlin, an illustrator, concept artist, and instructor. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at a few things. Mostly how to be painting an interior scene. I don't see it talked about that often, and so I think it'll be just perfect to jump in. So to get us started, I'll be going over a few of the basic properties, using examples of what light does and how it behaves. And then we'll talk about some of the lighting properties and principles as it pertains to interior illumination. Then we'll go into a brief demo, sort of paint over of some student work that I have. And let's begin. First, let's just look and have a little recap of what light does and how colors get affected by it. Right, so let's assume, hypothetically, here's a bunch of flat shapes. Let's imagine there's a warm light, particularly like, almost like a white light. It'll be kind of like this color here. Right, that's our main light in the scene. It's often referred to as the key light. Right, so we're going to look at just how that affects this white sphere, the red one, and the greenish sort of oval here, and how that light really behaves with the different elements. So time lapse this up. We'll probably look at this next week, or the next video I do will be like how to really calculate some of this. But basically, right, we're looking at, right, here's the white sphere getting hit with a warm light, and the blue ground plane, right? So we have blue coming in. This is the light's hitting the blue, bouncing back, right? This is a bounce light. So if you think of bounce light as, this is a red sphere, and the bounce light's blue and red, right? You'll get a lot of these subtle purple transitions happening underneath here for all the bounce light. Now, what's going to happen, it's great to do lighting studies in general with a bit of atmospheric light, or like kind of like ambient light. In that case, it's kind of like this bluish sort of background, right? It's right here in the value. It's very cool, very blue. So we have those tones subtly affecting, right, the backside of all these objects. It's essentially what makes up the whole shadow. This is often referred to as the fill light. And the fill light is part of that core shadow. Now the shadow really, right, that really starts right here on like a lot of the surfaces. Right, this is like the core shadow. That's where it's the deepest and the darkest, right? Because behind the core shadow is that fill light. Now, what's also happening, with that, the last part of the equation really is the ambient. Sorry for my writing here. I'm just trying to get through this part. The ambient occlusion. Right, this is where no light gets. This is the nooks and the crannies. So if I were to highlight that, right, it'd be like the areas in between all the little objects and underneath where no light gets. Think of it in between your teeth, like it's the areas you would floss, and that's where it's where shadows are at the darkest. But the other thing to really note here is that the areas of light are generally linear and flat, right? Like the color of light on each of these is fairly one note. It's like just the surface getting hit by light. So you have like warm yellow green, warm white, and like a warmish red. Right, that makes up the only color there. It's like only one note. But there's a lot of subtleties happening with the light and the shadows. It's warmer here, it's cooler, it's darker green. There's a lot of subtle temperature shifts. Lots of color making their way into them. That's because color likes to party in the shadows. And that's where it's really great to embellish them. And that's important to this lesson today, because when we're doing an interior scene, unless it's got so many large windows, a lot of it is about this bounce light. A lot of it is how this light is, the ambient light is coming in, bouncing all around the room. And that's why taking things and practicing them in very simple situations like this is a great way to start. Here's another example of kind of what we'll be looking at, what I'll be painting in the next demo part, right? So here's the room, right? The object in the area, there's no light at all in it. And imagine if we just shine like a giant spotlight through here. This first direct lighting pass is illustrating that this is the only area that's getting directly affected by that. But that's not how light behaves. As we looked at those spheres, the light's going to hit here and just start bouncing and shooting out everywhere. And that's where you'll get something that looks a lot more accurate, like this, of a typical room, right? The light's coming in, it's going to be bouncing, it's going to bounce again, again, and again. And so that shows that even with like one limited source of light in a scene, you can really illuminate things almost as much as you'd like. And of course here we have you can see the shadows for the ambient occlusion. You can see the warmer lights where it's really direct bounce, and it's cooler where it's more fill light. Right, here's another example of that. Right, so when I'm approaching a lot of interior scenes, if I'm just doing a drawing first, I like to ask myself, right, and this is where it starts, ask yourself what is in light and what is in shadow. And just when you could trace those shapes very clearly, like, right, this is a light shape, light shape, right, light shape. Everything else, the negative stuff, right, that's all shadow. So you need to understand fairly minimally for a lot of scene construction, interior and outside, where the light and where the shadows are, because they're going to be families of values. And then basically from there you can go in to figure out where that light is coming up, bouncing into the remainder of the scene. So like this would be step one, this starts to be step two. So we'll just look at this example here as this scene plays out. Right, here's the direct light, here's the light starting to bounce its way in, coming to illuminate the facade. Here it's really hitting, right, parts of the ceiling. You're seeing part of the light start to bloom around, and then here's some more of the midtones kind of fill their way in. So there's a lot, and that's why there's probably not a lot of videos out on there, because like lighting interior spaces, it's very circumstantial. It's very particular to what the lighting environment's doing, what the temperature of the light is, and of course how much of it is reaching that inside. So this is just a brief overview. And that leads us right here to where a lot of students can typically get, assuming they understand perspective, they have a layout of what they want to do. Happens to be like a little bit of like a Moroccan-inspired interior of a shop that sells magical goods. So a lot of people do get to this level and they're like, okay, how do I light that? And now that's really what we're going to look at and focus on. For the first step on a lot of these, I recommend students to try to just put in some flat color. Right, that's the local color of objects, where that would be the color affected by no light whatsoever. So the main part of the technique here is that once you have everything with a bit of flat color in it, you can make a copy of that layer if you have it all in one layer like this so far. Right, and then you basically make a darker shadow version of it. So by going to levels, curves, brightness, contrast, you can literally choose your option in Photoshop. And then you take a lot of the light out. Now, depending on your light source, you may want to make it a bit cooler in temperature like this. You could go into red channels, make it a little bit warmer. Again, it all really depends on the time of day that you want to go for. If I was going for late afternoon, early evening, I would probably do like a bit of a warmer tone everything. But if it's early morning, high bright afternoon, maybe cooler with more blues. So once the lights are all out, basically going off the models in the example that we looked at before, what we could do is make the shapes not only on the ground, but on the objects and walls, anywhere where we think that initial direct light may go in. So this would change depending on whether you literally want a direct light source coming through one of your openings like a door or a window, or if you would want it entirely filled with ambient light. I think for a lot of pictures, having a little bit of this directional light in there, so some direct light that kind of be like from a point light, makes the imagery a little more visually interesting, because I can go for these really hard shapes of that direct light. So the first step with this, as I mentioned, is I have to go to every little aspect in the scene where it would be getting direct light, make it as a shape, and then either if I have a mask for the original version, or if I have like a color dodge or an overlay blending mode on my brush, I can just brighten up on the original dark layer that I made. So see, like if I select just the front of the vase here, I can just blast it with some of that light coming in from the door on just the spot where it's shadow. So again, if you zoom in more, if you have like a higher resolution file, you can really get careful and particular with this. So that is, it's a fairly simple, almost like painting by numbers approach. Now you'd have to just maybe do lots of observational work on the back end, maybe get some reference photos, do a bit of studying up if you're really struggling at this stage. Because like I said, without a true 3D model of this, all we're doing is basically guesses. So it is better when they're educated guesses and you're pulling from some previous experiences doing this, but you got to start somewhere, right? So again, I'm imagining that these podiums or these pedestals here are blocking some of the light, so I'm adding some of the cast shadows across the top of the table. And this isn't going to give you like an instant sort of finish, but at least it will organize your picture into two categories, right? Like what is in light, what's in shadow. And then from there you can really embellish and overpaint anything else that's remaining. Like there's still a bit of line art, that's seen throughout the image, and that's something that can be overpainted, at a subsequent step from here. So see, I'm just putting a little bit of that light coming into the door right on that wall. I'm imagining that the tea kettle there, or the pitcher, is creating a cast shadow on that wall as well. And if there's a cast shadow like that, that really is implying that this is a direct light source, because just normal everyday ambient light coming in will not create a shadow like that. But again, that's something I'm kind of embellishing here. It's just an artistic choice I'm making. It's not to say it's the right way or it's even the wrong way. It's just my interpretation of what I want the light to be doing in here. So at this stage, I can work things the opposite way too if I want to get adventurous. Like I can select that whole nook where the bed is, and I can just make that all darker. That would be where that ambient occlusion is. So if I want to just speed things up here just a bit, just to show, now what I'm doing is I made my brush a bit of like an overlay mode. I grabbed a brighter, warmer color, and see from here, it's very easy. As I use this airbrush, I could start glazing over the darker areas of the wall to imply a little bit of that bloom, a little bit of that light bouncing, and it gets really easy to start pushing the light once you have a few of these direct light sources into play. And for a scene like this, my usual approach is to figure out one light source at a time. So, right, if this is a door, a wide opening coming in, I'm going to work all around this general area to figure out what that light is doing to the room. Now there's an entirely separate one, upstairs. I will figure that one out separately. The last thing to take into account on this is if there is something like a man-made artificial light in the scene. Like you can see a bunch of lanterns up on the ceiling. For me personally, I like to figure those out entirely separate. So again, I'm going to paint the whole scene if it's naturally lit, because I like having that the light mix in a very natural way like that. It gets a little difficult to juggle artificial and natural light sources at the same time, in a confined space. So like anything that gets complex, just tackle it systematically or in a step-by-step form, and it becomes a lot more manageable. At least that's what I find. So see, I imagine like there is warmer light up there, so I can start to make little selections of individual wall sections and just start to brush on lighter, more warmer colors where appropriate. So, regardless whether you're pitting out shapes of direct light or filling in bounce light areas, just tackle things in the specific areas bit by bit. And so here's a little more. Before you know it, you'll have a scene that looks like it was pretty well lit. They're taking what we talked about, they're making it pretty far. You could see they now have a very clear version where the lights are on, or the natural lighting is in place, and there was before. So it's pretty cool to see it come alive together. Now they were asking, how is this working? And I'd say, for the most part, it's pretty good. They're concerned they want to get a little bit brighter in places. Like overall, it is a bit of a darker tone. So we can look at how to make these adjustments at this stage. Now there are some things in this that kind of catch, are a little bit of red flag. Like there's a massive stone table here, right, and the light's coming in, but there's really little to no shadow, behind that. So that something like that's pretty big, and you'd want to address stuff like this sooner than later. So, right, just coming back here and filling it with some sort of shadow, blues, purples, whatever the color is going to do. So, right, going to go like that, and probably a little bit softer, as it gets away from there. There's areas up here as well where, see, if we're going with the direct light rule down here, but not having that up here where it probably is, because it's on the same wall, you still would probably get, a direct line of light, like something kind of like this in there, right? It's going to make a very clear, very clean shape. So it's going to come into the scene, then that light's hitting here, and it's going to be bouncing up and illuminating this back wall pretty well. All right, so we take that, and we can just imagine a little bit of these yellow greens. See, everything's an excuse to show and to push light. Can really make these scenes come alive. Right, so a wall could have a very nice subtle gradation, something like that. The light even here, right, that's going to bounce up and around and hit that wall. And one easy way I like to do something like this, if I'm working on a singular layer, is something like an overlay. Just getting a warmer, kind of creamier version of that color, right? And if I just gently rub over that line there, you can see the light just naturally bloom right into the shadow area. Right, that's what a real good strength of what an overlay blending mode on a brush does. And now I can come back right to the wall and really make it feel like that light's here, bouncing up into here. And so that's why these can be really challenging, because there is a lot, innately going on an interior scene, even one that's all naturally lit. But I'd say this is pretty well blocked in. You could bring in a few cooler lights and ultimately use brushwork to define more materials. Like if I grab the stairs here and just kind of go over with a little bit more cooler, ambient light, on the edges and stuff. That's a good way to imply, the matte surface and that it is collecting some of the light. You can apply dust particles, depending on the exact situation you're going for. Like anywhere there's a direct light source, basically right here coming in, you can, again, subtlety is the name of the game. Applying a little bit of dust particles there, that can add a little flavor to it. But let's say if we get it to this point and this particular student of mine wants to brighten it up. We looked at a little bit of reference, we've noticed, well, yeah, this is a little dark. In some scenes you can play that dark, absolutely fine. Let's say if we look at these references here and we want to use this natural light just a little bit to embellish some of the brightness in the room, I think we can absolutely do that. And it's just a matter of kind of going in, overall, and you can kind of key the scene in a few different ways. We can have it feel a little cooler. Again, if it's a little more morning, early afternoon, we can make things feel a little warmer. But let's say we want to use one of these photos to overall, as a reference here, we can bring up the overall brightness. So what I did is I copied the entire image, and basically we can just use levels and things like that to really just bring up or down, right, the overall value range in the scene. So see this on a global scale sort of brings everything up. This kind of knocks the shadows down, and it's a fun way to tinker with that overall brightness in the scene. So as you can see, the light outside, that goes to a pure white. That's just light overexposed, and that's completely normal for a scene like this, because we are basically setting the exposure on the interior side of things. So yeah, that looks pretty nice like that. See, I like going by where that light is coming in and using more these warm neutrals, and that's all they are, is they're warm neutrals, to basically add a little more brightness. Because this is a light surfaced wall anyway, so it is going to absorb a lot of this light, and it would look something a little more natural like that. So again, warmer near that light source, right, where the light's trickling in, and then it's going to subtly fade to these neutrals as seen over here, and that's going to make it feel really natural in the scene, kind of like we're seeing up here. So this sort of effect basically applied more or less to that entire wall. There's some patterns and designs on the wall, so I'm not going to take the time to go carefully sifting through that right now. But yeah, I would basically just blend this out as carefully as I can. And then if there is light up here and you do want to show them, like, you could introduce a little of that color like into the wall as well. Like, sure, like there's nothing wrong with that, and it can blend and overall look rather nicely throughout the scene. Now you could color key or grade the whole image. Like, you could go to like color balance and spike in a little bit of warm throughout, or you can even use a tool like select the color range and grab all the darker values in the scene like this, right? So that's all the darker values similar in color, and again you could go to levels or color balance and just punch in like a little bit more warmth overall, or maybe even select the inverse of all of that and add like a hint of green. Again, that's just going to unify a lot of the mid-range. See, it's hard to see with it all selected. See, but there's a lot of subtlety you can really play up with a nice scene like this. So yeah, see, like that's the difference. Now if you want to just subtly nudge some of that out, another technique I do is go to the effects here, check out blending options, and move these sliders. So see, like, you can gradate how much that light you really want spilling in. It's a fun little technique. So see, if I just subtly turn that down a little, again, it's another way of knocking back the lighter areas. But I mean, I think for the most part this is working rather nicely. You could even drop it down to like 85 on the fill if you want like a subtle approach. But yeah, this looks great. So I hope you learned something along the way. Remember, hit subscribe if you want more free art tutorials and advice, time lapses. Let me know what topics you want to see in the future. If you think I sound pretentious and I suck, let me know that as well. And you guys have a great weekend. When in doubt, always grab a good reference. Color thrives in the shadows, and light is absolutely a wild beast to tame. So do your best, folks. Thank you for checking out my video. You can support the channel if you'd like by subscribing, liking, or commenting on my videos. You can find me on the web on Facebook, ArtStation, and Instagram. Those are the social media outlets I utilize. I also teach 2 courses at the Computer Graphics Masters Academy, Architecture Design and the Fundamentals of Design. Feel free to check those out. Now, if the classes aren't for you, I also teach one-on-one. Join the hundreds of students around the world for one-on-one learning, and for more info, just send me an email. Also, feel free to join the Brush Sauce Discord community. There's links below. It's fun. We do weekly hangouts. There's the challenges, and it's a great place to make friends. Take care.